Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRevelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Revelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. Alright, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Revelis. I am your host as usual, and welcome back to the Friday episode. Today's episode 45 of the show. So that means 5 episodes away from the 50th episode special. So like I keep saying, we're very hard at work at it. There's really only one thing left, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as the date comes closer. Obviously, as you guys saw on my social media pages last night, Juan Bagnell's coming on the show next Wednesday. So I hope you guys don't miss that episode because obviously, very big interview for me. It's going to be over a great topic that we're both very familiar with and Juan is very, very passionate about. So you guys definitely don't want to miss that episode. Obviously, next week's episode for Friday, I'm going to host a poll over 2 topics and I'll let you guys choose because obviously, like I said, is Wednesdays is already decided. Anyways, from there, it's kind of ironic that there was a specific video that popped up last night before even recording this episode that it was over the topic, and it essentially kind of led me to go in this direction because this is where I was thinking of going with the episode to begin with when I mentioned it, which obviously we're going to be talking about Nvidia's GPU dilemma. So this is going to be much different, but at the same time very similar to the episode I did with AMD's GPUs because Nvidia's GPU problem, or dilemma I would say is a more proper word to use, is that it's not in terms of hardware inconsistencies that we're worried about here. It's more of the lack of competition. Like, essentially, we're not worried about the hardware in this scenario. We aren't. We're more worried about the, I'd say, price to performance ratios and the overall market when it comes to Nvidia because, as we all know, Nvidia clearly is the most popular graphics cards and widely used graphics cards in most people's computers because overall it provides the best value for the money. But that may have changed already due to the launch of the RTX cards to begin with and then now the super cards. But let's go into it. So the video I'm referring to is from a guy named The Good Old Gamer, which I'm going to give a shout out to him because of his video, well-informed video. And it was over the idea of the GTX 1080 Ti, and he titles it The Anomaly That's Killing RTX. And when it comes to graphics cards, and I think a lot of people will agree with him on this one, was when it comes to graphics cards specifically, it's very hard to justify anything over $500. Is a very hard thing because that's when the price to performance ratio drastically dips. Like, that's why people prefer to get graphics cards under $500 because by that point, then, you know, you get the most bang for your buck essentially. And when he talks about the 1080 Ti specifically, which obviously is the main card everybody likes to talk about, it is a anomaly. And he obviously posts links and everything from Tech Power Up going over the 1080 Ti. And it breaks down how this card was such a weird thing. And it's crazy to think about how, like, last year's flagship card, the card that was under the GTX Titan, because obviously, you know, we have, you know, the RTX Titan and things like that, but it's interesting that we end up going in that direction. And when you look at the specs specifically, when they talk about it, they go over the Founders Edition, which was original price point of $699. And then they even provide the comparison, like, to all the cards that came out during its time, because obviously the 1080 Ti was meant to replace the 980 Ti. And obviously big jump in performance, you know, clearly we're talking about, you know, higher shader units count. Obviously the transistors was higher, memory size was definitely higher, memory type, like essentially what the 1080 Ti was. And this is kind of the whole point that we're going to get at, is what caused Nvidia's dilemma essentially was the 1080 Ti. Because if you look at the 1080 Ti compared to the Titan, essentially their shader unit's the same. RPO, obviously Titan has a little bit more. In terms of memory size, the Titan has 1 more gigabyte, so instead of 11 it has 12. They use the same type of GDDR5X RAM. Obviously memory bandwidth is going to be higher on the Titan. The clock speed is going to be, the core clock specifically is going to be higher on the 1080 Ti, and then its overclocking is actually higher than the Titan. And it was priced at more than $500 discount because like we mentioned, is the 1080 Ti was $700 and the Titan was $1,200. So the reason that this kind of led to this discussion that we're at today is because everybody's well aware of the RTX cards when they came out. Like, everybody was like, oh, we know Nvidia is going to drop the 20 series soon. We know this is going to happen. We just don't know when and what are we looking at in terms of price. And obviously, this has led to a lot of issues because a lot of people really like the 10 series. The 10 series is overall the most popular cards. Like, the 1070 is probably the most popular card, while the 1080 Ti is considered the workhorse because it's a very, very capable card. Even though, yes, it is using an older architecture, it's still an overall very potent card, especially because when the 1080 Ti came out, it was overall a more logical reason or a better option to get than the Titan, essentially, because you were getting essentially better performance for less. And the reason why they considered the 1080 Ti I'd say a weird anomaly is because of the price to performance ratio, because it's meant to replace the 980 Ti, which my friend has the 980 Ti, Thomas, and he's gonna upgrade cards soon. But that's why I said it was also interesting too. When you look at the jump in performance, and the old gamer actually brings this up in the video, that when you look at the jump in performance, you're gaining over a 75% performance increase from the 980 Ti to the 1080 Ti for a 30% price hike. That is a huge price to performance ratio that made it such a good deal, and that's why it's considered one of the two only cards that deserve to be like over $700, and it justifies people buying it. And I get why like people are very upset about that, because they're like, well, how does this all relate to the dilemma? And the reason this is important to the dilemma and the whole conversation is because the RTX cards just aren't price to performance reasonable. Like, it's not reasonable. It doesn't make logical sense. And Nvidia is confused on how. But I think it also comes down to two main factors. The lack of competition from AMD is clearly one of them. But at the same time, it's that they realize that I don't know. I think this one specifically might be a little bit of a stretch, but let's try to see what we can do with it. I think it comes down to the fact that they know they can get away with anything when it comes to graphics cards, because they know they have no competition. Obviously, there's going to be something that changes in the future, but we'll talk about that when it happens. But Nvidia doesn't have to worry about competition. Like, if we're being honest, they didn't need to make RTX cards. Like, I get it. Some people are like, oh, RTX is such an amazing thing. It's an amazing technology. But I'm like, yeah, I get it. But it's like, RTX is okay. Like, do you really need do you really need it? Like, that's why they consider the 1080 Ti an RTX killer, because it's such a great card that performs arguably the same way. And probably, like, I think in terms of performance, they actually checked it, really, that the 280 and the 280 Super only perform about 10 to 20% better, but for a larger price gap. And obviously, yes, the price to performance ratio is not good. It's not that big of a jump. And this is where a lot of people are worried with Nvidia, because there's a big jump in performance for a price hike, like for a reasonable price hike. It's not happening anymore. And as I alluded to when I was talking about the 1080 Ti, there was a card that did it before, and that was the Nvidia GeForce 8800 GTX. That was the first card that people recommended over $500. And it's what essentially set the precedent that we would eventually get the 1080 Ti. So we end up having these two very well-known cards that were essentially what created this whole idea that you should never spend more than $500 on a graphics card unless if it's a special exception, when the price to performance ratio is fair, it's balanced, or the performance you're getting for a price increase is fair and reasonable. That's what this whole thing is about, is that you're getting a fair, I'd say fair trade, essentially, is what you're getting. But it's interesting when you look at it, because Nvidia, as we keep mentioning, like, I'm going to keep saying this because it's overall the truth, Nvidia just doesn't have competition. And then when you even look at the super cards, it kind of just shafts the customers if you think about it. Like, if you bought a 260 or a 270 or even a 280 before, you got shafted because they ended up coming out with a 260 Super, a 270 Super, and they ended up replacing the 260 and the 270, the original ones. And they're actually the same price. So, and a lot of people pointed this out, and I agree with them, is that the super cards should have been how the cards were when they came out. And I agree, they should have been. Obviously, then you have Nvidia making their more budget-friendly cards like the 1660 and the 1660 Ti. And while I do agree the 1660 Ti is a good card for the price, I still wouldn't recommend it. Maybe if you're starting off your first build, then yeah, maybe I would say it's a good build. But I think it's still debatable due to the fact that 6 gigabytes of VRAM is starting to not be enough for some games. A little bit older games will be fine, perfectly. But I think it's just newer games, as they update with like better graphics and everything, then yeah, it's going to be a little bit harder, to be honest. It will be. Like, obviously, I have a 1070 in mine, and I love my 1070. Mine's the Asus Dual one, the white Tiger one that has overclocking. So it's a really great card, and for the money, I got it for $220. So that's a great bargain for that card that they don't sell anymore. But Nvidia ran into this dilemma because a lack of competition, and they realized that they don't need to keep making these price to performance cards because they already had two. And obviously a lot of people don't want, like, they want you to get rid of your old cards. That's what they want. They want you to get rid of your old cards and buy the newer ones. That's why they made RTX to, I think, eventually make the older cards not obsolete, but just make people consider, hey, all these games are using RTX, but you can't use it, so might need to upgrade. But a lot of people don't care about RTX. And this kind of runs into Nvidia's dilemma because they don't have any competition that's making them push a little bit harder to make better price to performance cards. Because when you look at the high-end market of cards specifically, the high-end market, Nvidia has zero competition. They own the high-end market. They own it completely. AMD has nothing. And the only thing AMD ever had that was even close to it was the Vega. And, well, they didn't live up to their promises with the Vega, and it flopped because they were like, oh, the Vegas are going to compete with Nvidia's high-end line. It's going to be better than a 280 and stuff like that. And people are like, ooh, this is interesting. We might actually have some competition in the high-end market. And it failed. Because the main competition, clearly for graphic cards, is that under $500 range. This is the war zone that's going on here because there is stiff competition to see who reigns supreme there. Because that's where most gamers are. They always stay in that under 500 range. That's where gamers love to stay because that's where you get the, I'd say, arguably the best price to performance ratio. But even then, you're still pushing it a little bit. But we end up running into a scenario that Nvidia is up on the top at the very high-end market, and they have zero competition in the high-end market. So that means they don't have to make these high performance and, I'd say, low price ratios, essentially. They don't have to worry about that because they can charge whatever they want. But for some reason, the 1080 Ti was the best example. Besides the 8800 GTX, it was the best example of a high performance increase from the card it's replacing, which was the 980 Ti, for a 30% price hike. And that's absurd. That is insane for what you're getting. Like, I don't think you guys understand how much of a big jump in performance it is. And it's a card that a lot of people still have. If you have a 1080 Ti, you're not replacing it anytime soon. Like, at best, it will probably last you like another 2 to 3 years easy if you take care of it, clearly. But that's what it's meant, is that it's a card that was meant to disrupt the market. And, it ended up disrupting Nvidia's bottom line too, because RTX just isn't catching with the audience. It's not catching with the market. And I get it. Like, the $500 price range is the war zone, but that doesn't mean you should compromise in the higher end market, especially because the higher end market is inclined for gamers that want to say that they have the best gear, or people that like doing CAD design and everything. Even though, yes, I would still recommend that you get a Quadro instead. But even then, like, a lot of colleges do recommend the 1070s and above, like 1070s or 270s or 1080 Ti's, or like, they recommend those cards too, because they're very capable cards with the amount of VRAM they have as well. And obviously, yes, the Quadros are specifically made for CAD designing. They're meant to handle heavy rendering loads. And obviously, yes, they're very expensive too, because nobody has anything to compete with them, because they're just good. They're like an industry standard. But you get my point, is that Nvidia's competition in the high-end market there's just nothing there. AMD tried, and the promises of Vega were just puffs of smoke, really, is all it was. Like, obviously, yes, in terms of the under $500 range, yes, there is a lot of stiff competition. You have cards like the 580, like, obviously the 5700 and the 5700 XT. You have those cards. Obviously, we've already talked about those and the issues with those cards, but when they work, it is great competition for Nvidia. Clearly it is. But Nvidia has to worry about competition from themselves, if we're being honest, because most people aren't really buying like the 2070s or the 2060 Supers. They're not really buying them. Most people are realistically just buying like secondhand 1070s, 1070 Ti's, 1080s, 1080 Ti's. People are mainly buying those cards offhand because you get better value out of them. And yes, you have to be very careful when you're buying secondhand cards, because secondhand cards, you don't know what the person was using them for. I always recommend that if you buy a secondhand card, the person should never have used them for mining at all. Never buy a card that was slightly mined on. That is a horrible idea, because mining is a process that definitely ruins graphic cards. So do not buy any graphics card that somebody is trying to sell you that they said they mined with it. If they say like casual streaming, like, and they show you it was casual and it's like a recently bought card, then I would pull the trigger. But I make sure you be careful with that stuff, guys. And we'll talk about it a little bit in a future episode. But this entire dilemma with Nvidia is a very interesting one, because they essentially dug their own hole. Like, and it's not because of a bad thing. It's mainly because they just haven't been pushed to that limit to make something better. Like, think about it. When AMD announced the 5700 and the 5700 XT, they made the super cards and they pushed them out first. But because of that, AMD was able to counter and lower the price of the 5700s to make them competitive. That is the problem with the Nvidia, is they're not playing to be I wouldn't say they're not playing to be competitive, but they're not playing as if they need to catch up. They're playing because they know they are the alpha dog in the scenario. They know they are the cream of the crop. They know that they are the one that everybody is going to buy, regardless of what the competition makes. And in the high-end market, when there's no competition, you can only buy Nvidia. And it kind of sucks a little bit, because you can't really do much about it. Like, I get it. Like, people are pushing for AMD to make something to compete with them, but AMD just realizes they have nothing to compete. They tried it with the Vega and it failed. Like, people thought, oh, the Vega card is going to destroy the 2080. No, it's not. And we saw it didn't. Like, it failed and nobody bought it. Like, that's why they just canceled it outright. And, like, I don't know. Depending on what Nvidia or AMD specifically decides to do, like, we'll see. Like, I think eventually they will make something. Like, Intel is also coming into the space, so maybe they might try to, like, just go right off the bat and target Nvidia for the high-end spot. So who knows? But in terms of Nvidia's dilemma, specifically with the GPUs, because that's what they make, they kind of dug their own hole. And it was kind of indirectly with their own card, which was the 1080 Ti. And I will always keep referring to this card because it creates that central point of, this is what caused the RTX to not do so well, because you made a good card that was a good price to performance ratio, or not even good, exceptional price to performance ratio. That you made a card this good that is literally your second card in the history of GPUs that has done this kind of insane price to performance ratio. Obviously, the first one was the 8800 GTX, but the 1080 Ti was the second to do it. And so far, none of the RTX cards even come close to the cards they were replacing. Essentially, we're talking about if we're comparing like a 1060 to a 260, I think the price to performance ratio was somewhere around the lines of, I don't know it exactly off the top of my head, but I don't want to say any misinformation. But the price to performance ratio was not so good. And obviously we saw the price hikes. And from the 1070 to the 1070 to the 270, yeah, there was a price hike too, because obviously I think depending on the 1070s, depending on which ones you buy, obviously third-party cards are going to be a little bit more expensive, clearly, because of the cooling solutions and everything. But you also have to keep in mind that what Nvidia ended up doing with changing the styles of the cards too, because think about it. If you buy the 1060, the 1070, and the 1080 and the Ti versions from Nvidia directly, it is the blower style card. And then all the third parties were, better cooling systems and stuff like that. So obviously they were going to charge more. That's why my 1070, if it was brand new, it was like $560. Obviously that was mainly because you were getting a better overclock. It's a good starter card for overclocking because of its good clock speeds while overclocked. It can maintain comfortable temperatures, healthy temperatures. And, obviously if you bought it later down the road, yeah, it's a great value because, like I said, I got it for $220 and my card was only a month old. So I still keep the full 3-year warranty and everything is registered under my name now. So I'm pretty much golden. And depending on the company too, the warranties are actually really nice too, depending. So, but that's aside from the point. But you kind of get the idea is that the price to performance ratio nowadays is Nvidia is essentially creating their own competition is what they're doing. Because when it comes to AMD, yes, the 5700 and the XT version are great cards. Clearly they are. But in terms of competing with Nvidia, it's just not cutting the cake. Especially because of the blower style. I don't know what cooling solution, I actually do, but in terms of cooling solution for those cards, it was just really bad. And Nvidia learned from their mistakes. That's why they don't use the blower style anymore. If you look at them, they're actually using the dual fan style. And that's all the base cards. That's the Titan has it. All the 20 series cards have them. Even the TIs are all dual fan because they're it's more efficient. It's better for overall cooling and you can get better overclocks from them. But you get my point is that we've run into this dilemma that Nvidia accidentally dug their own hole, and it's because the last flagship card they made, but it's not the Titan, which arguably a lot of people have stated that the 1080 Ti was better than the Titan, the GTX Titan. And the Titan obviously was $500 more. So you get what I'm saying is we're getting this, I'd say tug of war essentially with Nvidia and the customers, is that the customers want better cards that provide a huge performance increase for a fair price hike. But if you're going to charge more money, let's say I'm saying crazy number right here. I'm throwing crazy numbers. If we're talking about a 30 to 40% price hike for a 10% power increase, then we got a problem because that's not reasonable. Nobody wants to buy that. And you can't just say, oh, it's because of RTX. No, it's a feature that didn't even work at launch too. Let's keep that in mind. RTX did not work at launch. Yes, more games are supporting it now, but it's still a slow and steady race. I think by the time that I'd say realistically, by the time the 20 series is over is when RTX will be widely adopted, and by then people will just buy the 20 series because then they know that they can get a better deal. But you get my point. Overall, Nvidia is still doing good. It's just obviously their sales are going to suffer because it doesn't make logical sense to buy their cards, like especially the 20 series. I personally would always recommend that you go to the 10 series because you can get the 10 series offhand for a good value, good price, and you're getting great cards that have already shown the quality there. And it kind of goes by the same logic of buying stuff. Like some people rather play with what's already tested quality than untested. And yeah, a lot of people didn't really want to buy that. They don't want to upgrade from the 10 series yet because there's no reason to. You don't get good value. That's why people ask, should I upgrade from a 1080 Ti? And I tell them, no, you shouldn't. Keep the 1080 Ti for like 2 to 3 more years, maybe even 4, and then upgrade, because by then RTX will be a little bit more ahead and there'll probably be better deals for the cards. So I would just wait, hold on to your cards, guys, right now. Unless if you have a 1050 Ti, then I would probably upgrade for sure. But if you have a 1070 or 1080 or 1080 Ti, or 1070 Ti, 1080 and 1080 Ti, I wouldn't upgrade anytime soon. Hold on to your cards, guys. You're still going to run all the games at high settings very easily at 1080 and 1440p if you go that way, but 1440p might be a little bit harder for older cards. But like I always tell people, 1080 is great. It's always, my opinion, it always relies on the hertz of the display, really, because 1080p at 144 hertz to 244 hertz or 240 hertz is phenomenal. It's great. Like obviously you can get good 1080p panels. Trust me, there are good 1080p panels. But that's really all I got for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Obviously, yes, it's more of a very tech-oriented. I'm going to leave a link to the Good Old Gamer because of his very educational video, and I hope you guys, can get something out of that video. And it's a long video. It's like 20 minutes. So I'd give the brother some love. Hit the subscribe button, click like. It's very well-informed video. He breaks it down very accurately, very correct. He shows you all the numbers too. So it is very important that you guys, if you really are interested in the Nvidia dilemma, I would highly recommend you watch this video to be well informed on what's going on, essentially. And overall, yeah, it's I really enjoyed this episode personally because I was not expecting to find this video, and it literally popped up the night I was thinking of like writing the thing for this entire episode, and I was like, huh, this really lines up with everything I was going to talk about, and it's well informed too. It's well put together. So thank you guys so much for coming back and listening to this week's episode. I really appreciate it. Obviously, I'm really excited for next week's episode because we got a big interview lined up for you guys. It's going to be phenomenal. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation I have with Juan Bagnell. I hope you guys get to know a little bit more about him because he's a very humble man, very, very well informed with how he presents himself, and especially in the topics we're going to talk about. It's gonna be incredible. In my opinion, it's gonna be incredible. But thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate you guys. You guys have yourselves a wonderful weekend. I love you guys to death. Thank you guys so much for coming back. Also, a quick shout out to my Patreon backers. Thank you guys so much for your continued patronage. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you guys so much. I love you guys to death, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.